Hi, John Herman here. This week, I'd like to continue our study of the book Final Gifts, written by hospice nurses Maggie Callanan and Patricia Kelley. As you may recall, after interacting with terminally ill people for over 10 years, they decided to document some of their observations. Their goal was to educate those left behind as to what dying persons can experience and what messages they might be trying to convey to their loved ones. The behavior that they observed was separated into two general categories. The first category, which we considered last week, was what a dying person might be experiencing towards the end. These experiences might present themselves to us in a number of ways. The person might use cryptic language to convey a message, or they might talk of seeing people who had previously died, or of seeing a bright light, or of a beautiful place. They may also tell you plainly when they will die, or, on the other hand, use cryptic language to convey that information. With a little foreknowledge, the remaining loved ones may have a better chance in understanding what the dying person is trying to tell them. The second category, which I will look at today, is the dying person's desire for something that will bring a more peaceful death. A few examples might be: one, that some sort of reconciliation needs to occur. Two, the dying person may want someone in particular to be present for their death, or at least to see someone one more time. Three, they may be waiting for some event to take place, or some condition to be just right. Four, they may need certain information or some reassuring facts related to the process of dying. Or five, the dying person might feel the need for permission to die because he or she might feel guilty for leaving others to carry on without them. Now, sometimes these peaceful death requests are coherent, in which case they usually bring results. However, if the request is vague or uses symbolic language, it may be ignored or missed, which will lead to frustration and anxiety, both for the dying person and for their loved ones who don't understand. In some cases, people have been known to hang on longer than expected because their need had not yet been fulfilled. Unfortunately, this extended life is not usually of good quality, either for the patient or for their family. Now, here are a few examples of common last desires. We'll start out with the need for reconciliation. Dying people seem to develop an awareness that they need to be at peace. There's a strong drive in many to search for healing and reconciliation, whether with other people, with God, or even with themselves. As death nears, issues that once seemed insignificant or that happened long ago now become important, and the dying person wants to settle them. If this awareness comes late, when death seems imminent, the person may prolong dying in an attempt to experience this resolution. If the request for reconciliation is made coherently, most friends and family will try to help. For example, if a dying man said, "I need to speak with my sister. We had a terrible argument 15 years ago, and I haven't spoken to her since." Most people would try to find the sister to facilitate healing. However, sometimes the request is less clear. If no one picks up on the person's desire because the language is cryptic, the dying person may become agitated because they realize that without this closure, their death will not be peaceful. All right, here's an example. Andrea was a 29-year-old mother of 3 who was dying of uterine cancer. She was a very together woman who did not seem afraid of dying but had many questions. When she met the hospice nurse for the first time, she wanted to know what dying was like. She was apprehensive about the unknown, so the nurse explained the physical events that would probably take place to her body and what she would experience. She assured her that only in rare instances had she seen painful and frightening deaths. Andrea was both surprised and relieved. As the weeks went by, Andrea's condition deteriorated. Her husband mentioned that she sometimes talked about his dad. Andrea and he had become very close, and his dad often referred to as his daughter. When the father was told of her terminal illness, however, he flew into a rage. He maintained his attitude of anger throughout her illness. Andrea believed that he actually blamed her for her illness and for leaving her husband to raise their 3 children. This, of course, upset the husband, and so they were both upset with the dad. The hospice nurse suggested that perhaps the father loved Andrea so much that he couldn't deal emotionally with losing her. The father finally agreed to talk with a hospice social worker, and the father finally admitted that his behavior was due to the fact that he did not want to lose her. However, he was not ready yet to talk with her. Now, Andrea's condition worsened to the point that she slept most of the time and was agitated, restless, and confused in her speech. Amid the cryptic words, she did manage to say to the nurse, "We must go to the park." The nurse asked the husband if that meant anything to him, and he said that his father would often take Andrea and the kids to the park. The nurse realized that it was the dad that Andrea wanted to see again. The husband swallowed his pride and went to bring the father to Andrea, like it or not. Time was running out. When the two met, there was a tearful reunion and with many apologies. Andrea died peacefully that very evening, with her family and the father surrounding her. The authors commented that sometimes dying people know what they need for a peaceful death but can't communicate it to others. Take, for example, Andrea's remark about going to the park. This ambiguity results in agitation of the dying person when they are close to death because they are frustrated and feel powerless to resolve the issue before their time is up. In this case, the nurse figured it out and the situation was successfully resolved. All right. Now, what about needing someone to be present, or, on the other hand, not to be present? Some dying people seem to know when they'll die, but others may actually choose the moment of death. Sometimes the dying person will try to spare those closest to them from witnessing the dying event. This is actually done out of love for those left behind. Here's an example of this one. Michael was a preteen boy with a terminal illness and had been admitted to the inpatient hospice unit. His mother was very protective and insisted in being with her son full time to keep an eye on him. She even requested a bed so that she could stay in his room. The disease rapidly progressed, and one day he told his mom, "Mom, I sure would like a pizza." She offered to try to get one from the hospital cafeteria, but he said, "You know, I really like the ones from so-and-so's. They're my favorite." She didn't want to leave, but decided to humor him anyway because he seemed to really want that pizza. While she was gone, he died. The nurses were convinced that Michael wanted to spare his mom the pain of actually seeing him die. Another final gift. Now, what about needing some information? The authors believe that the dreams of dying people can be significant. They may contain clues as to what the person needs to die peacefully. Isabel was a 39-year-old psychologist. She was dying of a neurological disease. She knew she was dying, but was very distressed because even though she was a doctor, she knew nothing of what death would be like. Then she told the hospice nurse about a terrifying and recurring dream she had been having. She dreamt that she was being buried alive. With a look of horror, she described dreaming that she was in a coffin, unable to get out, and feeling the weight of the earth pressing down upon her. When she awoke, she was too terrified to go back to sleep. The hospice nurse made the comment to the reader that usually the best interpreter of a dream is the dreamer. So, the nurse asked Isabel if she could explain her dream. She said, "Well, it reflects my anxiety, of course. I'm afraid the funeral director will take me away while I'm still alive. They'll put me in a coffin, take me to the church for a service, then to the graveyard and bury me. But what if I'm still alive?" Then she continued, "I'm the wrong kind of a doctor for this. I don't know much about death. How will you know I'm not still alive when the funeral director comes?" The nurse knew that the fear of being buried alive is not uncommon. She also knew that Isabel needed to know exactly how medical personnel would determine if she were truly dead. The hospice nurse, over several discussions, told her the exact procedure in determining death. After determining that there was no heartbeat or breathing, the body would remain at her home for at least an hour, after which her body would show further signs of death, becoming cold and turning blue on the underside. Now, even these details seem graphic. It was exactly what Isabel needed to hear. Afterwards, she said, "Now I feel better. Talking about this has helped me see that my dreams were caused by anxiety." She then called into her room her brother, who was caring for her, and said, "Now, Edward, when I'm gone, don't hurry things along to get me out of here. Wait at least 2 hours." When Isabel finally died several months later, the nurse checked her body for signs of life as her brother watched. He then said, "I know Isabel's watching us to make sure we're doing everything she asked us to do. I made some tea and chocolate chip cookies." So for the next 2 hours, the brother and the hospice nurse sat around talking about his childhood stories with Isabel. When a dying person has a dream, pay special attention to vivid dreams, recurring dreams, or a series of dreams that are progressive in some way. Dreams that frighten a person may relate to fears about dying. Dreams filled with anxiety may mean the person is worried about family, expenses, or arrangements that need to be made. Dreams that are puzzling often indicate a need for information. All right, now what about waiting for some event to occur? Sometimes a person will linger before dying until a certain event takes place in what could be termed holding back. They are able to hold on to life even if their medical condition dictates otherwise. All right, let's talk about Claude. Claude was a conscientious person who paid attention to detail. His friends teased him about being compulsive. An accountant by trade, his favorite hobby was writing programs for his computer. For a while, he dealt with his terminal illness in his usual, quiet, non-complaining, organized way. Then, as the Christmas holidays approached, his condition deteriorated rapidly. He suddenly became restless, agitated, and confused. He kept complaining that he couldn't find the program. "So the system won't work." The nurse assured him that he would, and she was there to help him in any way she could. She told Claude's wife that she thought something was holding Claude back, but they could not figure out what it was. There was no unfinished business, no reconciliations that she was aware of that needed to happen, and that it was felt that Claude knew that his wife and family would be all right when he left. So what was it? The mystery was finally solved when one of Claude's business partners called. He told the wife, Emily, that Claude had asked him to handle financial matters after he died. Emily told him that Claude was very near death. The man's response was, "Oh, what a shame. He's just the greatest." And he was so worried that he'd die before the new year. It turned out that if he lived until then, his retirement benefits for Emily would be in a higher category of payments. Emily had no idea of this. Claude lingered until January 2nd, when he died peacefully and with higher death benefits for his wife. One of Claude's unfinished businesses was resolved, and he did not have to hold back anymore and was able to die in peace. Here's another example. Kathy was a talented dancer and an aspiring writer. She had been married only 3 months when she was diagnosed with a deadly brain tumor. Hospice was engaged, and she told the nurse that she had 2 goals: to see her first anniversary and to finish a book that she had only so far collected notes on, but had not begun writing. The nurse was concerned because it did not appear she could survive that long. It was 6 months to the anniversary, and there was no telling how long it would take to write the book. However, Kathy and her mom were very close, and she quit her job and assisted her daughter in completing the book. Her anniversary also came, and a great party was had. Both goals had been achieved, and everyone prepared for Kathy's death. Her quality of life had deteriorated to the point that it was difficult for those who loved her to watch. Kathy's mother was to receive a prestigious award in Europe. She didn't want to leave because of Kathy's death seemed so likely while she was gone, but Kathy insisted that she go. Still, she did not die. The hospice nurses were puzzled. Then, a time later, she quietly died with no one around. The day nurse had left the room long enough to help another nurse carry in supplies from her car. Kathy's husband had gone out jogging. For that one moment, she was completely alone, and that is when she chose to die. In her mind, she had spared those who cared for her, including the hospice nurses, the agony of seeing her die. That was her final gift. Now, this example was actually a 2-for-1 special. Kathy not only completed her unfinished business, but spared those who cared for her the anguish of witnessing her final moment. Family members sometimes feel guilty about not being there for their loved one's death. They say, "Oh, if only I had stayed at the hospital 1 more hour." But sometimes it's exactly what the dying person chose to do. Another final gift. All right, let's look at needing permission to die. Sometimes the right circumstances for a peaceful death might include receiving permission to die from another person. Now that sounds weird, but it happens. Sometimes permission can be given indirectly. Everything will be fine. Other times a more direct approach is necessary. Just let go. I'll miss you, but I know you need to go now. Now that's telling you pretty directly what you're expecting. Here's an example. Bernie was 89 and dying of colon cancer. He was very independent and had lived by himself since his wife's death years before. He was a very precise individual and followed all the rules to the letter of the law. 2 of his neighbors brought him meals every night and visited. However, his condition continued to deteriorate, and his out-of-town niece Greer was called to see if she would visit. She was shocked at his appearance. His doctor agreed that he needed terminal care. Along with the hospice staff, additional nursing help, and helpful neighbors, things seemed to be under control, so Greer felt comfortable in going home. 6 weeks later, she got a call that Bernie was slipping in and out of a coma and might die any day. She returned with her mom, who Bernie referred to as Sis. She was very close to him. Now, Bernie rallied for a few days, but then declined further to the point of being bedridden and barely able to talk. While Sis was sitting with him one day, he said, "Sis, I've got to go home." She replied, "I know you do. It's okay. We're ready for you to go. You just go ahead whenever you're ready." But he didn't go. 2 days later, he stopped being able to talk, but started reaching and waving with an urgent expression. Sis told him that many of his relatives who had already died were waiting for him. He looked at her with surprise and said clearly, "Why, they're right here." He never talked again. But he continued to be agitated, still waving his hands. He finally slipped into a coma, but seemed to be lingering. The stress of all this was affecting everyone in the house, and tempers were short, but still he lingered. Finally one night, Sis was sitting with him, and she said, "Bernie, you listen to me. It's Sis. This is important. Your work here is done, so tonight's the night to go. Do you hear me? It's Sis telling you it's okay to go tonight." Immediately, his breathing changed. Within a few hours, he died with his family surrounding him. No one in his family had thought to tell him when to go except Sis. He was just following the rules. As a follower of the rules, that's just what he needed. Okay, I think I'm going to stop here. As we have seen in this section, there are sometimes conditions that will bring about a more peaceful death for your loved one. Learning exactly what they are can be challenging, but with some foreknowledge and the benefit of observation of others, we have a chance to understand and fulfill our loved ones' final wishes. Next week, I'd like to briefly summarize what the nurses hoped to teach us from their experiences and include some of their tips when caring for dying loved ones. If there's a chance we might make a difference in the dying person's experience with a little knowledge, so much the better. I realize that some of this may be morbid or depressing to be studying, but sooner or later we will all be faced with the loss of a loved one, if we haven't already been down that road. And who knows, but that some of this knowledge might help us when it's our time. Have a good week.